What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. So we're continuing our conversation about tiny house communities in New England. So next up is Massachusetts. So today I'm going to talk about tiny house communities in Massachusetts. This is a great video for those of you who are living in Massachusetts or you live in any of the surrounding states. So it would be too long of a drive for you to make that shift to living in Massachusetts. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and let's jump into it. Let's talk about tiny house communities in Massachusetts. All right, welcome back. So today we're talking about tiny house communities in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is a fantastic state. I've actually lived there before. I lived there for about 3 years. There's a lot of pros to living in Massachusetts. I think it has a lot of potential as a state for tiny houses in general and tiny house communities in particular. So there's a few reasons why I wanted to talk about this state. For one, it's in New England. I know quite a few of you live in New England and have mentioned Massachusetts before. When we're talking about cost of living, just like for every other part of New England, that is not one of the factors for moving there. Massachusetts is actually one of the most expensive states to live in New England and in the United States in general. It's $100,000 a year in terms of median family income compared to $80,000 nationally. So you're going to feel quite a big jump in terms of your groceries, in terms of housing. The real estate market there is similar to some of the markets on the West Coast. But nonetheless, the pros are similar to other states in New England. So you are in New England. You are really close to PA. You're close to Maine, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont. You've got a pretty decent drive to New York, so it's not too bad. And then Rhode Island as well, too. So you're close to all of these really cool states you can check out in like a day's trip or something like that. You've got Boston, which is well known for its universities. You've got several coastal cities and beaches in the state of Massachusetts. You've got a little bit of history there, too. And you've got the museums as well. So tons of pros, tons of things tick the boxes. Now, I will mention the climate because someone did mention the climate in Connecticut in one of the more recent videos, and the climate in Massachusetts is not to be ignored. So in terms of the summers, they're beautiful. You can go to the beach spring and fall. One of the most beautiful parts of the country, in my opinion, when it comes to fall and all the leaves changing colors, but the winters can be really brutal. So you're looking at negative 15 degrees, tons of snow. It could snow for 4 to 6 months. So you do have to take that into consideration if you're going tiny, because you're going to need a builder that understands the weather and make sure that your house can withstand those harsh Massachusetts winters. But the tiny house laws are pretty similar as they are in other states. They vary by county. I looked at Nantucket, Massachusetts. And so in Nantucket, you have to have a tiny house that's 500 square feet or less. So you can only have one per lot, and it's got to be on foundation. So what that means is that you're probably looking at ADUs. So it shows that the ADU culture is improving, not necessarily that the tiny house culture as a whole is, but we'll get into that in a minute. You cannot have a tiny home that's registered sort of like as an RV. So that kind of rules out, I think, park models and potentially tiny houses on wheels, and you'll need a permit. So that's what it looks like in terms of the laws, at least in Nantucket. So you always want to check the county that you're interested in. You never know. They might have a different setup, but in Nantucket, you're looking at a tiny house on foundation. For tiny house communities, I mentioned this before, I don't have a problem mentioning it over and over again. You're looking at affordability, right? Especially when you're looking at these high cost states. So I live in California. In California, it is going to be cheaper for you to go tiny than it is for you to buy $1 million home. So states like California, New York, Massachusetts, parts of the South even, it might make more sense to go tiny than it would to try to go the traditional housing market. You're going to get those amenities in tiny house communities, the location, depending on where you're at. There's quite a few in the South that are a little bit closer to major cities. So you have to take a look at that. The security factor is more and more of them try to provide more, beefed up security with gated communities. And then I included flexibility because I know for some of you, it's not going to be permanent. So going tiny allows you to try it out, right? Living in community allows you to try it out, as opposed to if you make the plunge and you buy land, you DIY your tiny home, you're kind of in it for the long haul. So for those of you that are on the fence and you're not sure if this is something you actually want to do long term, moving into a community gives you that flexibility because you don't own the land. Maybe you can rent the tiny home and you can really see if this is something that's truly a good fit for you. When we're looking at tiny house communities in Massachusetts, so I think that Massachusetts has a lot of potential when it comes to tiny houses and tiny house communities. As it is right now, when this video is recorded, which is April 2025, there is not one single tiny house community in Massachusetts. I did a lot of research. I looked at tons and tons of websites. I looked at the entire map of the state of Massachusetts. There's nothing. So this is what it looks like in Massachusetts right now. Massachusetts is a campground state. There are dozens of campgrounds in the state of Massachusetts. I don't know if that's contributing to the lack of tiny house communities, but as you can see, there's a ton in the southern part of the state and the northern part of the state as well too. There's a few in the middle that don't show up on the map, but this is what it looks like. So as of right now, there's no tiny house community, but there's tons of campgrounds and there's a couple of RV parks. So we're going to talk about what that means and what that looks like. On the plus side, there are tiny house builders. I found one. So this is what their website looks like. The tiny homes. I've actually spoken to their owner before. So they're a brand new tiny house community. They've been operating for less than a year. These are what their homes look like. So they're a little less cookie cutter, traditional in terms of the style that you see of a lot of tiny homes here in the United States. So they're worth reaching out to if you have questions. They build larger tiny homes too. So this is the only tiny house builder that I could find. I know there might be like one or two others. So if you do know of a tiny house builder in Massachusetts or one in the surrounding states that's willing to build a home and deliver it to Massachusetts, please drop it in the comments because I would love to know and I'm sure it would be helpful for other people. So what we are going to talk about is some communities in Massachusetts that are sort of like adjacent to a tiny house community. First up is Hideaway Village. This is what one of the homes looks like. So Hideaway Village is in Bourne, Massachusetts. It's 15 minutes from a Walmart, so it's in a good location in terms of having access to all the things you need. It's an established community of cottages that are for rent and for sale. So like they're smaller, like 600 square feet. All of them kind of look similar. So you can buy them. So there are some for sale on Zillow. I think the most recent one sold for like around $225. So you're looking at the higher end, but you will own the land and you'll be an established community. There's an HOA, but I couldn't find how much the HOA is a month. So that's something you'd have to look into. And the rentals are looking at around $250 a night, but it's on a bay. So it's on Buzzards Bay, which is a huge advantage in terms of just the aesthetics and sort of like the vibe and the climate that you'll be experiencing if you chose to live there. So Hideaway Village is worth checking out. Next up is Sirius Community. So this is an eco village. This is what their website looks like. They've been around since the late 1970s. It's about 20 minutes from a Walmart in Shutesbury, Massachusetts. So an eco village, basically what it means is that they're looking at more of like an intentional, long-term, sustainable community of people, sort of like like-minded adults. I kind of see it as similar to like a homesteading community. They do education. They're focused on permaculture. They have a community center that's shared. You can do daily stays and you can do long-term stays, but you have to apply. So you have to apply to live in the community, try it out for a year and see if you're a good fit, because it's a lot around like working together and sort of like cultivating the land and that sort of thing. So you have to be interested in that sort of like setup and their values, so that it could be worth checking out for those of you who are interested in just doing something a little bit different for a year. So this is serious. So the other aspect of this is the land buying route. And I figured it was worth talking about because there are quite a few of you who live in New England. You love Massachusetts, for example. You don't want to leave. Maybe your family, your kids live there. So land buying could be an option. If you want to go on the cheapest, I found on land for sale was like 3/4 of an acre for $80,000. Now this is in Worcester County. I know that area, so it just depends on whether or not you want to live in an area that's a little more urban, so you won't be like as far out in terms of where you would be living, but it is close to things. There's universities there as well too. So this is what that option would provide you. And then like the complete opposite of that is if you want to go to the beach, you're gonna have to pay a lot for it. So 1.5 acres, it's gonna be like a little over $1 million, but it looks gorgeous. So it just depends on what you're interested in and what you can afford. So if you're really sort of like, I gotta stay in Massachusetts, it might make the most sense to just buy a small piece of land, put a tiny house on it, and then go from there. So it depends what's best for you, right? As always, in all of these videos, that's how I end them, because it really does matter. Like, I'm here to present the information. I do all the research and do the best I can to provide you guys with as much information as possible. But ultimately, you've got to make the decision. So in this particular video, we're looking at a cottage community that's already established. You can't really do too much about the homes. I'm assuming with the HOA, you can't change the outside. You could rent a home or you could buy land and DIY it. So that's kind of the snapshot of things in Massachusetts. But there are 3 options based on what I've talked about today. So Hideaway Village, you have Sirius Community, which is a intentional living, sort of like eco-sustainable community, or you could get land and DIY it, or find a builder, contract them out to build you a home on the land that you bought. But what do you think? What do you think about Massachusetts? What do you think about New England in general? I've covered quite a few states now in this particular region. Do you feel like it's worth figuring out how to go tiny in this area, or do you think it makes more sense to move? I know that's tough when you have family and friends nearby, especially if you're older and you're downsizing and you don't want to be isolated. So drop a comment. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think. I'll keep looking up other states. If you haven't seen my most recent video on tiny house communities in other states in New England, you can check them out here. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.